The first time was actually for the church, and that one worked out pretty well. And so this time I'm going to do this teaching to you guys for the second time. I already did this teaching, and then it didn't, from the device that I was using, it didn't upload. So then I spent a long time trying to set up this whole system again on this computer. Wow, okay, I'm glad that I'm done with that. I'm sorry. Okay, and I'm whining at you. I shouldn't be whining at you. It's not your fault. Okay, so let's see. Couple items of business. Hi, guys. This is Steve talking here, doing Bible study, just like we've done before, except I'm down in Eugene. And see, my bookcase is down in my office, and here I am in my office, and I'm sitting all alone. And it's 8 o'clock. I had it all done. Never mind. I'm not whining. I'm not whining. Okay, now, before I did scripture readings. This was a while ago. Well, I'm doing them again. See, scripture readings. Now, why is it that it keeps going backwards like that? Do you see it backwards? All right. No, anyway, it says Jesus the outreach worker. This is a scriptural guide. This ones that I'm doing now. If you want me to send one to you, I have some extras. I'd be happy to send them to you. So just let me know if you are interested in one, and I will get that to you. It's new, spanking new. And then what else? So we've got. So let's get into this now. Last time we did one, I did one on feeding the 5,000. And basically, we took the text apart. We talked about some things that we can learn about feeding the 5,000. Now, there's going to be a little bit of overlap here, but mostly we're gonna cover something else. So we're going to talk about Jesus healing blind people today. But I want to have an introduction first. So first of all, what I want us to think about is, does my face look red? I think my face looks red. My hand looks red. Look how red that is. It didn't look that way before. Okay. When we look at something or are trying to determine something or judge something, then we really need to understand the proper context and how we look at something. The context determines so much about how we look at it and everything. So, for instance, in the ancient world, back when Christian monks were just getting started, there was this monk, and he was part of the group. He was part of a group called the Desert Fathers and Mothers, and he would participate in that community. And you know, of course, there were rules, same as there always was. But the other brothers noticed one day that he would always leave once a week. One time, a couple of them followed him, and turns out he's going to a brothel. I see. So they look, they follow him. He's going to a brothel. They come back, and then they, just to make sure, next week when he leaves, yeah, sure enough, he's going to a brothel again. Oh, great. So they call up a tribunal, a big tribunal, and they get the bishop over to judge and all of that. And they're going to excommunicate him or something. And they're like, we need to get rid of this guy. He's going to a brothel on his days off, and we really need to take care of that. And the bishop said, slow down, slow down. So we know that he's going to a brothel, but let's hear what this guy has to say. So the monk stood up. And he says, you're right. I go to a brothel every week. And that's because my sister is in that brothel. And I go to her every week, and I beg her to get up and to come and be a good Christian instead. And everyone goes, oh, well, that's just an example of how, if you got to kind of know the context. If we look at a context of something, that determines how it is that we see it, how we look at it. So now let's look at the Gospels. How is it there's a particular context of that, and how we look at the Gospels, or what we think the Gospels are really about, and the context that the Gospels are in, that makes a huge difference. So, for instance, if we say that the point of the Gospels is to prove Jesus' deity, then everything we see is going to try to prove that particular point. If we think that the Gospels are about Jesus' death, then we're going to say, well, see, everything is leading up to that point, and the whole thing is about him dying for our sins. And same if we want to say that they're about love and forgiveness and things like that. Now, sometimes you got to slow down. You're going to say, well, wait a minute. Why don't we ask the guy who they're about? What is it that the context is? And not necessarily what they're about, but what is the context of the Gospels? And so let's go ahead and ask Jesus. And it's convenient that within the Gospels, there's a guy who was asking Jesus, well, what is the context here? And that was John the Baptist. John the Baptist was in prison. John the Baptist sent a couple messengers to Jesus saying, what is this that we're hearing? We're really concerned. We're hearing about theological arguments. We're hearing about some really unorthodox things going on. What's going on here? And so Jesus talked to the messengers and said, come on, follow me all day. And so they did. And then at the end of the day, Jesus turns to them and says, now, I want you to go back to John. I want you to tell him what it is that you have, what it is that you saw. You saw the blind receive sight. You saw the lame walk. You saw that the lepers are cleansed. I really have a problem with the word leper. You know, next week I'm going to be doing one on lepers, and I need to make sure that I do not say leopards at all, because if I say leopards, that sounds like Jesus is trying to get bleach and take the spots out, and he's cleansing the leopards. Lepers. The lepers are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and good news is preached to the poor. Jesus is saying that the context of his gospel, the kind of the water that the gospel swims in, is helping people in desperate need. That's the context. That is what it is that Jesus is doing. Now, that doesn't necessarily tell us what the point is. That's just the context in which it's in. But what was exactly Jesus doing? Jesus was walking down the street and he was helping this person. That's where whatever person is in need of help, he would do that. And he went from village to village and place to place, and he would help people. That's what he did. He would take whatever resources he had, which happened to be pretty massive, and he would help the most desperate people that he saw. And so this is the thing. Now, when we have someone like that nowadays who goes around and they go on the street and they just look for people who are help, and they maybe bring whatever resources they have and try to help them, we call those people outreach workers. We call them outreach workers. We call them just people who are trying to help someone else. And so what Jesus is saying is the way that he wants the message of the kingdom understood, and the presentation of the kingdom understood, and what the structure and all of that of the kingdom is, then he wants us to understand that it is about going out and helping people as we run across them. That's the context. The context is Jesus is an outreach worker. And so we just need to remember that this is the context. And so what we're going to do, what we did when we talked about the feeding of the 5,000, is that was kind of the same thing. Jesus was in a situation. He saw a bunch of people who were hungry, and we learned some principles about what Jesus was doing there. And the same thing here. Now, one of the principles that we learned was that we're supposed to participate in that. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple situations. We're looking specifically at Jesus helping blind people. Now, there's a lot of stories that I would love to get into, but I'm just going to do a couple of them today. So we're starting in John chapter 9. John 9, and we're going to read the first four. I've got it here, and I didn't give you any time to look. You can always pause the video and just go and look, okay? So John 9. As Jesus passed by, he saw a man blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. First thing I want to point out, something that I did point out in talking about feeding the 5,000, is that Jesus uses the first person plural. This is our work. We are doing this work, not I am doing this work. It's not like, well, I'm doing this work and then it's going to be done. Nope, he's not saying that at all. He's not saying, well, you see, I'm actually God, and so I can do this work, but you guys can't. Nope, he's not saying that. We are supposed to participate with Jesus in this work. Just like with the feeding the 5,000, he said, okay, disciples, here you go. Now you feed them. And same thing here. He's talking about that healing the blind man, healing the sick, raising the dead. All of this is a work that Jesus and his apostles are supposed to do together. Now, some people might say, okay, yeah, but they were apostles. We're not apostles. So, it's a little different there. Well, the thing is that like in John, at the end of the book of John, we have a long monologue by Jesus from chapters 14 to 17, which is one chapter longer than the Sermon on the Mount, by the way. And Jesus is talking to them about all kinds of things. And we accept this talk as being about ourselves because it has, classics like love one another and I prepare a place for you and all of this. So we definitely accept this. And in the middle of that, Jesus says, I believe it's 14:22. The works that I have done, Jesus says, you will do as well, and greater works than these you shall do. So Jesus is definitely talking about sharing these. Now, we still have kind of a hang-up, and that has to do with the whole miracle thing, with the supernatural, that Jesus just kind of snaps his fingers and things happen. Jesus puts mud on the eyes of somebody blind, and poof, they can see. And we know, and that feels kind of, and that's like, well, I can't do that. I'm not a really good prayer, and I've never seen any miracles being done and all that. Look, it doesn't have to do with that. Jesus said that if you take a cup of cold water and give that to somebody, that's the same kind of work. Jesus is talking about helping people. He's not necessarily just talking about doing a miracle for them. He's using whatever resources you have. And if that's a cup of cold water, then that's that. If you've got food, then you've got something to work with. If you've got time, you've got something to work with. He says use whatever resources you have in order to help people. And so it's kind of like it reminds me of in Acts chapter 3, where Peter and John are walking down the street, and there's a lame beggar, and he's asking for money, and Peter says, well, I don't have any money, but here, I'll help you walk. What I do have, I'm going to give you. And what I do have is I can make you walk. And that guy was really happy. He wasn't expecting that. But the point is we use whatever resources we have, whether it be miraculous or not miraculous. We use what we have to help other people. That's the point. Okay, and I would say even more than that, when Jesus is saying you shall be doing works, or you feed people, or you do that, Jesus is actually establishing this as a sacrament, as something that we are supposed to be involved in doing it, as just like we would as a Christian action, just like we would taking the Lord's Supper or praying. This is something that we should, as Christians, we should be doing as a basic foundation of our faith. This is it is an act of religion. In fact, James even called it the pure religion, doing this kind of work, helping people on this level. This is pure religion. This is the kind of thing that we should really be involved in. All right, and so that's it's really important. So it's like it's one of the basic rituals, one of the basic activities that we should definitely be doing. Is when we see someone in need, we should be helping them. Okay, well, I spent a long time talking about what we kind of talked about before, but that's okay. that's all right. We're gonna keep this up. So the other thing that's really weird about this John 9 passage is the apostles look at somebody who is born blind and they go, "Oh man, whose fault is it? Man, did this guy do something?" Which is kind of a weird thing to say. Well, oh, well, this guy's a sinner, so therefore he was born blind. So what did God do? God looked in the future. Whew, man, that guy's going to be really bad. I'll make him born blind. We'll get this. We'll knock him right down right off the bat. That way, nobody's having any question that he's got problems. And I think that they decided that it sounded really weird too. So they brought up another one, which is, well, what about his parents? Maybe his parents did something really bad, and that's how come he was born blind. Because of course, God would definitely do that. Phew, these guys are really bad, so I'm going to make their son born blind, so that way he has to live with it for the rest of his life, even after they're dead. Still a little wanky, still a little crazy there. But anyway, the reason that the disciples are thinking this way is because of the whole setup of their society, the whole structure of what we got. Scholars call the kind of Judaism that was going on in the first century, they call it Second Temple Judaism, in which your religious life had everything to do with the temple. You guys could disagree about doctrine, you could disagree about you could disagree about the law, you could disagree about all kinds of things, but everybody went to the temple, everybody sacrificed, everybody obeyed the priests. Everybody knew that that was what they needed to do. That was what they needed to. That's how everybody lived. It's what they all had an agreement, even if they could disagree about a whole bunch of other things. So, and that's really important now. And so, if you went to the temple and you went into the temple, you were a citizen. If you were not a citizen, you were not allowed. So, for instance, if you were a Gentile, you weren't allowed in the temple. If you were a woman, you weren't allowed in the temple. You had to be circumcised. If you're going to be circumcised, you got to be a guy. And so they had the court outside the temple, just outside the temple, for women and Gentiles to go. They could pray at the court outside. But the men who were circumcised, they can go in. But even so, there were some men who were circumcised who still couldn't get in. And that had to do with the idea of priests. So, priests had to follow a pretty stringent, if you're going to be a priest, it had to be pretty stringent. And one of the rules about being a priest, not only did you have to belong to the right family, but you also had to make sure that you were a holy person. And holy, one of the things about being holy is that you weren't crippled, you weren't blind, you weren't deaf, you didn't have a major problem. Oh, by the way, I just noticed, see, look, Fred Rogers, and look, he's wearing a tie, which means this is the first time that I've ever worn a tie since I was like in 8th grade. Anyway, so that was a distraction. So Second Temple Judaism, it's really strict. And if you were going to be a priest and you had to follow those things, then, that just meant if you were born blind, or you were born crippled, or you were born deaf, or whatever, you just couldn't be a priest. You may be part of the family of priests, but you weren't really a priest. Now, the thing is that they applied some of this to Israel at large, because it says in the scripture that Israel is a kingdom of priests. So some people said, you can't really go into the temple unless you follow all the qualifications for being a priest. It's not exactly what the law said, but that's what some people interpreted it as. So that meant that if you were blind, if you were crippled, if you were crushed in some way, you couldn't actually go into the temple, even if you were circumcised, even if you were male. And so that this guy who was born blind was rejected from birth of being a citizen of Israel. He was basically rejected by God. He couldn't go to the temple. He couldn't really pray. I guess he could go to the court of the Gentiles and women, but basically the the disciples just want to know, well, why is he being punished so badly? He must have done something really bad to be punished so badly, so that way he's not even allowed to be a part of Israel. Why? What happened? What is it? And Jesus looked at them and said, look, the point, the thing is that you're missing the whole point of what it is that him being blind. We don't look at people and say, who's to blame for this? We look and say, how can we help them? How can we do this? Because the point, Jesus said, is not that that somebody sinned. The point is that God is going to be glorified, that there's a good outcome to this, and we are part of that good outcome. And we just need to start thinking about that instead. So even though the Pharisees called this guy one steeped in sin at birth, even though they told him that, Jesus is saying, you know what? This is a guy who is waiting for an opportunity to be a full member of Israel. And so the thing is that when Jesus did his miracles and Jesus helped people, a lot of times, not exclusively, but a lot of times he's helping people who are outcast, people who are on the outside looking in. And he saw this guy as a person who's on the outside looking in. And so he approached him and said, hey, we're going to help you here. We're going to take care of this and have you be a part of our community again. Because what Jesus is doing is not just helping people be healed. He's helping people be a part of society again, to be a full member of society again. And you can see that Jesus is doing this again and again and again. All right, now let's go to a different passage, Mark chapter 10. Ooh, maybe you can get there faster than I can. Can you do it? Can you? But almost there. No, one more. Mark 10. Oop, don't go too far. Okay, Mark chapter 10. Ooh, but I didn't tell you the verse, did I? Okay, it's verse 46. Mark chapter 10, verse 46. So, then they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho, they kind of passed through Jericho, walking through Jericho. With his disciples and a large crowd, a blind beggar named Bartimaeus, the son of Timaeus. Bartimaeus and son of Timaeus means the same thing. Bartimaeus in Hebrew, son of Timaeus in Greek, in the original language. He was sitting by the road. And when he heard that it was Jesus the Nazarene, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And many were sternly telling him to be quiet. But he kept crying out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and said, call him here. So they called the blind man, saying to him, take courage, stand up, he's calling for you. Throwing aside his cloak, he jumped up and came to Jesus. And answering him, Jesus said, what do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, Rabboni, I want to regain my sight. And Jesus said to him, go, your faith has made you well. Immediately he regained his sight and began following him on the road. And we could see this in a lot of different ways. We could see this as Jesus is the teacher and Bartimaeus follows him at the end. We could see this as Jesus proving that he had power over blindness. We can see this about Jesus' authority or the man's faith. But the thing is that part of what we're supposed to get from this are lessons about how Jesus healed and how Jesus helped people. So first thing I want to point out is Jesus had a huge crowd, and he's passing through Jericho. He's focusing on going to Jerusalem. That's where he's headed, is Jerusalem, to be in his final week. And so he knows that that same day he's going to get on a colt and enter into Jerusalem. And later on, another day later, he's going to trash the temple. And so he knows he's really focused on what it is that he's going to do. And so he's walking down, and there's a huge crowd and people talking all around, and he's going over. And so Bartimaeus calls out, and Jesus doesn't ignore him, but he doesn't hear him. He's kind of focused, and he's got a lot of noise going on. And this isn't necessarily a fault, but it's just an interesting thing. Now, there was a study done in the 70s. There was a study done in which Jesus wasn't in the 70s. There was a study done in the 70s by a bunch of sociologists. And sociologists like to torture people. I don't know why, but they really love to set up studies to torture people. I mean, think about sociologists putting people in an MRI just to see what's clicking around on the brain and, putting them in a, anyway. All right. So there's so in the 70s, there's a group of student preachers, seminary students, who probably could deserve this kind of a torture. It's probably okay. They were all given a text that they needed to study and preach on. The text was the Good Samaritan. So the text of, you got this guy, he's been beaten up and he's over on the ground, and some people pass by him, and somebody else, and then some other folks come, this Good Samaritan comes and helps him and gets him healed and helps him out. Okay, basic story. Pretty well known. They're studying and they're going to teach it, and so they're finishing up their thing, and then somebody taps them on the shoulder and says, "Oh man, you've got to go over. You're late for your preaching. You've got to preach on this sermon. You've got to get going." So, oh my goodness! So he picks up his books and runs out the door. But little did he know that on the way between the one room and the next room, where he's late to preach his sermon, so he goes from one room and then he goes across. There's a person laying on the ground, and he's kind of moaning and he's hurting and he's clearly in trouble. And the people who pass by have to see him. They go right by the way, and they look at him, and then they have to make a choice. Am I going to help this person and miss out on my test, or I'm going to be really late if I help them? What am I going to do? Anyway, so it's interesting that as far as the number of students that helped them, they did different groups. So one group they told, "Oh, well, you're really late. You got to get going." Another group, they didn't make them late. They weren't that late. They were fine. They had just done the study and they had gone through. Now, if they weren't in a hurry, then like 60% would stop by and help this guy. But if they were in a hurry and they were running late, 10% of these students who had studied the parable of the Good Samaritan, was seeing it lived out in front of them, only 10% stopped and helped. I suppose it might have been less than that if they hadn't studied the passage. I'm not sure. And so the lesson is that the sociologist got from them, the evil sociologist, that basically, if you're in a hurry, then you're less likely to help somebody. Well, here you've got Jesus in a hurry, and Jesus is very focused, and he's heading to Jerusalem. But when he hears Bartimaeus' voice, he stops everyone. He stops the crowd. He stops everyone, and he stops himself, and he says, "Wait, somebody is in need. We need to see if we can help them." I bet Jesus listened to his own teaching on the parable of the Good Samaritan. That's pretty good. All right. Anyway, so Jesus is there, and he just stops everything. The one thing that no matter how focused, no matter how much of a hurry, no matter how busy he is going to stop for that one person who is in need of help. He's not going to pass them by and ignore that opportunity. That's pretty amazing. That's what Jesus is teaching us. He says, don't be in too much of a hurry to help someone who is in need. And then Jesus turns around and just does something I totally love. So Bartimaeus is going up to him, and Jesus looks at him and he says, "What is it that you need?" Now, think about the situation here. I mean, Jesus is the guy who heals blind people. Everyone knows it. Jesus heals blind people. That's what he does. Here's a blind person. And so it's a no-brainer. And Jesus is in a hurry anyway. Jesus could just go, boom, oh, you're healed. Let's go. And stopped. And it's like Jesus gave Bartimaeus a second gift. He gave him his sight, but the first gift he gave was he gave him the freedom of choice. Bartimaeus, I don't know how much he was blind. He wasn't a person who was born blind, but for however long he was blind, and he was kind of an outcast and couldn't do proper work. People were telling him what to do and telling him what was good for him and telling him what it is that he should do. And this is exactly what we do to outcasts today. We're constantly telling people who are outcasts, well, you need to do this, or you need to take this, or I can't help you at anything, but I've got this, and so you just need to take it or leave it. And we're constantly telling people who are outcasts what it is that they need to do. Jesus didn't, even though it was kind of obvious. It's kind of, I mean, even Bartimaeus says, well, I want to receive my sight. I think it was obvious to him too, but I think that Jesus gave him the choice, gave him the opportunity, saying, what do you want? What is it that you're looking for? Let me hear your side of things before I actually help you, because maybe you want something different than what I think you want. So Jesus gave him the opportunity to make his own choice. And of course, what he did is, well, duh, Jesus, I want to see. Okay, and Jesus did that, but he gave them that freedom. So not only did he give them sight, but he also gave them freedom to choose what it is that he wanted. And I have to admit, it's really hard. Because a lot of times I only have so many resources. I have only got so much. I can't give everything to everyone, and none of us can. But still, it's a lot of times it's good for us to ask and to stop and ask and say, well, what is it that you actually want? What is it that you're looking for? How can I actually help you? We need to take those opportunities to do that, because once again, it's that second gift of giving someone an option who doesn't have many or any options in life. So 4 things. We're just wrapping up right here. First of all, helping the needy is a basic Christian act of worship. This is something that this is a regular part of our Christian life. Just as much as prayer, just as much as reading the Bible, just as much as taking the Lord's Supper. This is to be just kind of a common thing that we do. Number 2, we're specifically supposed to help the outcast, people who are rejected, people who are outside, seen as kind of second-rate citizens or outside. We're supposed to target those kinds of folks. Number 3, we need to not be so distracted that we ignore people and help as we're passing by them. We need to slow down a little bit and give ourselves the opportunity to help people as we're going by. And then, in as much as possible, we need to ask and let the needy choose for themselves what it is that they want. They need to have that option and choice, and so that way they can have the freedom to be able to get what they need. I also really wanted to talk about the story of in Mark, the story of the blind man who Jesus was healing. This is in Mark chapter 8. You need to just turn back just 1 page or 2 pages in Mark chapter 8. It says in Mark 8:22, I guess I'm going to talk a little bit about this one too. Because we can be a little bit longer here, you get some stuff that I didn't get to do in church. So this is the good place to be. Mark chapter 8, verse 22 says, and they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to Jesus and implored him to touch him. Taking the blind man by the hand, he brought them out of the village, and spitting on his eyes and laying his hands on him, and he asked him, do you see anything? Now, here's the thing that's really funny, is how much spit is involved when Jesus heals blind people. The person in John chapter 9, he spit on the ground and mixed mud and put it on his eyes. And he did that again. He did that same kind of thing in Matthew. I don't know what it is about spit and healing eyes. I don't really understand that. Anyway, and so he laid hands on him and he asked, do you see anything? And he looked up and said, I see men, and I see them like trees walking around. And then he laid his hands on his eyes, and he looked intently, and he was restored and began to see everything clearly. So it's like Jesus had to, this is kind of a longer miracle. It's not just boom, oh, you're healed. It was more like, oh, well, okay, we do this. And this guy was definitely not born blind, because he recognized what people look like, and he recognized what trees look like, and he recognized that, well, people walking around shouldn't look like trees. They should look different. Anyway, so so Jesus healed. But the interesting thing that I noticed from this passage, as far as us doing outreach, is that a lot of times when we want to help somebody, it's not a one-time thing. It's not just boom, okay, you're done, you're healed, and that's it. Sometimes we have to go back again and again and again and again. Think about this. A lot of people think that this miracle is actually made to be a parallel to what the disciples were going through, that Jesus had to teach them again and again the same lesson just in order to be able to get it. And that's the thing, is that a lot of times we just want to look at people who are needy and just say, why are they doing the same thing over again? Why do I have to help them again? Why do I have to? Because we're people, and because people don't get it all the time. It's not a instant, okay, now you're better. It just doesn't work that way. We have to be patient, and sometimes we have to do the same thing over and over and over again in order to accomplish, to see a person's life change. And of course, for those of us who have worked with folks who are in need or who are outcasts, sometimes you don't see it change. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes the basic changes of the life changes just don't happen. But we need to keep trying. That's the lesson that I get from this one, is that we need to keep trying. So that's 5. You guys got 5 lessons today, and all that. And I'm gonna shut this down because it's 9 p.m. and I want to be done today. So I think that'll be good. Anyway, may the Lord bless you and keep you and give you peace.